We all face good times and bad times, hard times and easy times, times of applause and times of criticism. But God is for all times. He's for every day. You will never face a day where God is not needed or where God is not working in your life. Now, I personally feel we can see this dynamic in the ministries of Elijah and Elisha. I previously suggested that they seemed opposite in personality and in ministry style, but perhaps part of the difference we see is the ministry to which God called them. Elijah had a ministry of confronting those who oppose God, while Elisha had a ministry of comforting those who turn to the Lord. Elijah had a ministry of denouncing God's enemies, while Elisha's ministry primarily seemed to be one of delivering God's people. Elijah had a ministry of provoking the rebellious, while Elisha had a ministry of providing for the faithful. Yet in each of their callings and each of their ministry styles, we see that God was actively ministering to them and through them to his people. He is a God for every day, no matter what the day may hold. And when society was held in the clutches of kings and tyrants who wanted to push society towards worshiping idols, as we see in ancient Israel, God was still there. Just as much as when his people began to abandon idols and turn back to the Lord. Now, this is good news, because God doesn't change. No matter what you're facing today, God is the one you need to run to. He's there. He's there to help you. He's there to be a part of your life and to work in your life. And so if you're facing good times or bad times, maybe you're facing communist dictators who want to silence your faith, or if you're facing national revival where you can live in freedom, either way, God is on the throne. And he can work in your life. Now, in Israel, even though Baal worship had become the national religion, during Elisha's day, some of the people were turning back to the Lord. You see that begin with Elijah, and now Elisha is really the one carrying through into the times of more revival. And so today we're going to look at three miracles that God did through Elisha for those people who had turned back to him. And we're going to begin in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 38. When Elisha returned to Gilgal, there was a famine in the land. The sons of the prophets were sitting before him. He said to his attendant, "Put on the large pot and make a stew for the sons of the prophets." One went out to the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine, from which he gathered as many wild gourds as his garment would hold. Then he came back and cut them up and put them into the pot of stew. But they were unaware of what they were. They served some of the men to eat, but when they ate the stew, they cried out, "There is death in the pot, man of God!" And they were unable to eat it. Then Elisha said, "Get some flour." He threw it into the pot and said, "Serve it to the people to eat." And there was nothing bad in the pot. So we enter the story with Elisha making his rounds. We've seen that he tends to make a circuit through the nation of Israel, visiting the people in the country, serving them, encouraging the believers who had committed themselves to the Lord. And we left off last week with Elisha in Shunem, where he had raised the Shunammite woman's son back to life. But now we find that he's made his way down to Gilgal, which is kind of near Jericho. Gilgal was an important place in Israel's history. It's mentioned several times in the Old Testament, but it would have been a memorial site for the Israelites to remember what God had done for them. It's where the Israelites camped after God parted the Jordan River and they crossed over with Joshua. This is where they first camped. And the Israelites took up 12 stones out of the Jordan River and put them there at the site at Gilgal. Those stones would remind the Israelites and their descendants of the power of God and how he had dried up the Jordan River, bringing them safely into the promised land. And so Gilgal is where that took place. Gilgal's also a place of consecration and change. It was where the Israelites were circumcised and celebrated the first Passover in the Promised Land. Now, during the 40 years in the wilderness, the children that they had were not circumcised because they were always on the move. And so when they entered the Promised Land, it was time for them to take the sign of the covenant and be set apart as God's people. So it was at Gilgal that the Israelites had that circumcision, celebrated their first Passover, and began to eat the produce of the land. And so when they began to eat the produce of Israel, of the Promised Land, then the manna that the Lord provided for the Israelites in the wilderness stopped, because now they had the food of the land to eat. And so all of these things kind of center on the town of Gilgal, as well as several other Bible stories. Now, I suspect that Elisha and the sons of the prophets who had gathered at Gilgal were hoping to see this kind of consecration and renewal. They want Israel to come back to God. They want to see themselves set aside and turn back to God. And so gathering at this historic place makes a lot of sense. But upon Elisha's arrival, we find that they didn't have any food because there was a famine in the land. Okay, there's a famine going on, a repeated concept in Israel's history. Now, this story is extremely culturally removed from our day. We have no concept of what it is as a society to do without food. We probably understand a person who has no money for food. But the idea, the concept of food shortages to the point that there is nothing to eat is not something we've experienced. Now, we may have experienced them not having the food we want. You know, you go to the store and they're out of your favorite item and you have to get something else instead. That we've experienced, but the idea of going to the store and there is no food to have, that we've not experienced usually here in America. And so Elisha's solution was to forage for food. They're going to make a stew. They're going to make it out of just anything they can find. There was no recipe. It's just what, it's potluck. I should have saved the story of the poison stew for Potluck Sunday. That would have worked well. So he sends out his attendant, to get a large pot, put the pot up and get it cooking for dinner for all of the sons of the prophets. And one of them goes out to gather herbs and vegetables and whatever they can find for the stew, because that's what they're going to get, whatever they can find. Whatever they can find, whatever food is available, they're going to put it in the stew, and that's what they're going to get to eat. Now, if we did this here in Phoenix, we would probably wind up eating mesquite bean porridge, okay, if you want native food. And yes, if you didn't know that, the natives here did eat mesquite beans. I mean, that was actually a major staple food for many of the Native Americans. But, that's kind of what we'd be looking at if you just had to go out and forage for food on the native plants. Well, one of them, the sons of the prophets, went out and he found some wild gourds on a vine, and he brought back as many as he could hold. He probably, lifted up his robe and used it like a basket or like you might put stuff in an apron, and carried it back. Now, biblical scholars and botanists widely believe that the wild gourds in 2 Kings 4:39, the ones we're talking about, were the colocynth. It's a particular plant. And it's known as the bitter apple, and I do have a picture of that for you here. This is actually a distant cousin to the watermelon. It's a distant cousin to the watermelon, so looks kind of similar in certain ways. The fruit is intensely bitter and does contain a powerful purgative toxin, and that means it works as a very strong laxative. You weren't going to want to be in the outhouse of the sons of the prophets the night after they ate this stew. Okay, I'm just that's where this was going. Eating the plant could result in death. That is possible. I mean, it is toxic. And those who didn't die, even if they didn't die, they'd likely experience extreme gastrointestinal distress and possibly even some organ damage, liver, kidney type of stuff. The plant's actually apparently very common in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean region. And in case you're wondering, you can buy seeds for this on Amazon, so you can grow it yourself if you want it. I'm not making it up. I saw it. You can buy it and grow it yourself. It's supposed to grow well in hot, arid climates, and so if you like, apparently there's some kind of oils they make out of it for the people who are into essential oils. They'll make some oil out of it. Anyway, I hope that Elisha and the sons of the prophets prayed before the meal. Because when they were eating the stew, someone realized what was in it and said to Elisha, "There's death in the pot." man of God. Now, whenever you have home cooking, someone's bound to criticize. I mean, it's just the nature of it. Kind of makes me think of the moment in Lord of the Rings when they're eating Erwin's stew. I don't know if none of you Lord of the Rings fans, okay? But she's not a good cook. And so the stew probably seemed poison. But in Elisha's case, they really did have a problem because this could make the prophets very ill or even kill them. I mean, this is a serious issue. And so here they were. They're trying to follow the Lord. They're trying to do the right thing during hard times. They've gathered together at Gilgal. And what happens? They were all about to get sick from the stew Elisha was feeding them. This is a problem. So Elisha calls for some flour, which he throws into the stew, and then he declares it's safe to eat. Now, flour is commonly added to soups and stews as a thickener. It kind of makes the broth more gravy-like. And so, that makes sense. Gravy can improve even the worst food. I mean, that's a good lesson. We aren't really given an explanation here. There was a toxic plant in the stew, and Elisha threw some flour in it and made it safe to eat. Flour on its own would not make poisonous stew safe to eat. Okay, that doesn't work for us. Instead, the flour seems to be a symbol of life and of food used by Elisha, showing that God is transforming this deadly stew into something life-giving. God healed the stew when Elisha threw the flour in, much the way he did when Elisha threw the salt in the bitter waters of Jericho. Now, if you've got bitter water, throwing a handful of salt in it, that's not going to fix it. But God healed the waters of Jericho through Elisha by having him throw the salt in it. Well, throwing some flour in a poisoned stew is not going to fix it, but God healed the stew having Elisha throw the flour into it. And so we're not told how this miracle was done. We just know that God did it, and we're told that he did it, and this is the way. God's people, the sons of the prophets, got to eat their stew, and this way God provided for them. Now, they had ventured out to serve the Lord, and in return, God protected them. I mean, sometimes you worry, if we step out, if we go out there and we're serving the Lord in this wicked world, what's going to happen to us? Well, here they were. I mean, they have stepped out and they're serving the Lord, but God protected them and provided for them during that effort. Now, that's not the only way God provides for them in this passage. Let's continue in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 42. A man from Baal-Shalisha came to the man of God with his sack full of 20 loaves of barley bread from the first bread of the harvest. Elisha said, "Give it to the people to eat." But Elisha's attendant asked, "What? Am I to set this before 100 men?" "Give it to the people to eat," Elisha said, "for this is what the Lord says. They will eat, and they will have some left over." So he set it before them, and as the Lord had promised, they ate and had some left over. And so the next miracle we see is this man. He comes to Elisha. We're not told his name, but he came from Baal-Shalisha, which is probably in the territory of Ephraim, northwest of Gilgal. I'm kind of assuming Elisha is still at Gilgal. I mean, the one story just carries into the next. He's there with the sons of the prophets when this happened. And that man, who isn't named, brought 20 loaves of barley bread, which was the first bread of the harvest. He's bringing his tithe. He's bringing it to Elisha. Now remember, Israel had been separated from the temple. The temple was down in Judah. And so the people would bring offerings to the Lord. Sometimes they might just bring it to the prophet. And Elisha instructed that this food, this offering, was to be given to the people to eat. Okay, so we see this man bringing his tithe, and it's being used to feed the sons of the prophets. It's likely these are the exact same people, the sons of the prophets, who had survived eating the stew. They're still facing this famine. There's no food to eat. But even in this circumstance, they're working faithfully to serve the Lord. And so now the Lord is providing for them. He's providing through the tithes and offerings of his people. However, Elisha's attendant questions Elisha's instructions. Okay, here's 20 loaves of bread, but we got 100 men. This is not enough food for 100 people. How can I set this before them? It won't be enough. And and it's probably the only food they have. So Elisha commands that he do it anyway, stating that not only would there be enough, but that there'd be leftovers. Okay, leftovers are biblical. Just keep that in mind. And it just happened, as it happened exactly the way Elisha prophesied, the way the Lord had promised. Now, if this miracle sounds familiar to you, it's probably because Jesus did the same thing. Okay, now Jesus did it on a much larger scale, because Elisha fed 100 men with 20 loaves of bread. Jesus fed 5,000 with 7 loaves and 2 fish, okay? So Jesus did it on a much larger scale, but it's pretty much the exact same dynamic, the exact same miracle. The people were coming, in both cases, they've come to hear God's word. Revival is brewing in the hearts of the people of Israel. They want to turn back to the Lord. They're coming to hear from God's man in order to turn back to the Lord. They're facing a physical struggle of hunger. And so in both cases, God miraculously provides them with bread so that they can be fed. They were willing to put their spiritual hunger of coming to God first, and so God provides for their physical needs, their physical hunger. Now, I'd like us to look at one more miracle, which does happen a little bit later. It's not actually in the same chapter, but it took place with the sons of the prophets living in the area next to the Jordan River, and so I kind of see it as a connected concept, probably on Elisha's next visit. But let's skip down to 2 Kings chapter 6 and pick up in verse 1. The sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "Please notice that the place where we are living under your supervision is too small for us. Please let us go to the Jordan where we can get a log. We can each get a log and can build ourselves a place to live here." "Go," he said. Then one said, "Please come with your servants." "I will come," he answered. So he went with them. And when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. As one of them was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water, and he cried out, "Oh, my master, it was borrowed." When the man of God asked, "Where did it fall?" When he showed him the place, the man of God cut a piece of wood, threw it in there, and made the iron float. Then he said, "Pick it up." So he reached out and took it. So we see again the sons of the prophets gathered together. It doesn't tell us exactly where. Maybe it's the same group that's at Gilgal, which is not far from the Jordan River. But they're there living together, and we're receiving instruction from the prophet Elisha. And you might think of them as his students or his disciples. You know, back then they did not have Bible college. Okay, it wasn't like you could just go for 4 years and study at a Bible college or go to a seminary. You would learn your profession from someone who was a master at the trade. And so the sons of the prophets were people who had come to commit themselves to ministry. They were not of the Levitical class or the Levitical tribe, but they would come to the prophet. Elisha was the master prophet, and so they came to him for teaching, for instruction, to learn how they might better serve the Lord. And there were enough of them that they felt crowded in the place where they were living. Okay, now remember, you go back to, think of the change that's occurred, because if you go back to Elijah, he went to God and says, "I'm the only one left." Now, the school dormitory for prophets is overcrowded. Think of the change that's occurring in the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel, they're experiencing some revival. Now, the majority of the nation is still pagan, still worshiping Baal or still worshiping the golden calves, but many people are turning to the Lord, and Elisha is teaching them and ministering to them. And so they propose the idea that they should each go down to the banks of the Jordan River and drag a log back that they could use to build a place to live. Okay? They're going to make a bigger place for them to stay. In previous story, we saw there were 100 of them. Perhaps at this point there's more. And so they need bigger lodging, a bigger area for them to stay, have a big fair-sized dormitory. Elisha agrees to this plan, and he goes with them. He goes with them to the labor to drag back the logs, to supervise what they're doing. And they are facilitating the ongoing revival in the nation by providing additional living space for the people who would be trained by Elisha. He says, there's not enough space for all of us that you're teaching. And I think that's just a massive shift in Israel's nature of how many people had turned to the Lord. However, while they're out there chopping down a tree along the Jordan River, they're doing it to get a log that they can take back for their building. One of the sons of the prophets had an axe come loose from the handle and fly off into the water. Axes in ancient Israel, I looked it up. Apparently, axe technology has not advanced much. They weren't too different from the ones we have now, if you have an axe. Other than they were not mass-produced. Ours are mass-produced and generally, made of steel, hardened steel. Their axes, would have been custom-made, each one, and they would have been made of bronze or iron during the time period of Elisha. Now, we're told in this passage that this one was specifically made of iron. Okay, it does include that information. So this would have been a high-grade axe, one of the more expensive, like if you had the really high-grade, name brand tools, versus the generic. Okay, that's what we're seeing here. But the basic concept of having a metal axe head that was attached to a wooden handle is about the same as what we see today. And if you work with such tools, you'll know what a pain it can be if that handle gets broken or worn down so that the head starts slipping. Okay, that can happen. In fact, my dad had a pickaxe that was that way. The head didn't come flying off the top. Instead, it would kind of slide down the handle. And so you had to be careful if you were out there hitting it, because it might come down and hit your hand. And so you had to watch it if that wood wasn't, in there tight. And that was one of the dynamics that we're seeing here, is the wood was not tight enough. The axe head flew off and landed in the river. Now, that would have been a great loss, okay? If you're a workman and you have an expensive tool and you lose it, that's a great loss. An iron axe in their day probably would have cost several months' wages. Okay, we're talking expensive power tool for their day. It was a major purchase for them. However, in this case, it was borrowed, leaving the person who borrowed it legally responsible. Under biblical law, if you borrow something, you're legally responsible to return it. If you lose it, if it gets stolen, if you borrow an animal and it wanders off, you got to make good on it. You got to return it. You're responsible for its safe return or its replacement. And so the sons of the prophets weren't people with a lot of money, and this was a major problem. One of the sons of the prophets was giving up his livelihood. He had abandoned whatever profession he would have known before. He's there to study under Elisha. He's working to help build a place for the sons of the prophets to stay. He put his reputation and his financial future on the line to go borrow an axe for that purpose, so they can cut down trees, cut logs, and make their new place. And now the axe head has been lost forever. This guy's all in. He's giving more than he has to support the revival that's taking place in his nation, but now it seemed like all his hopes and dreams just sank. It's a big problem. Got good news, though. God cares about our problems. Elisha asked where it had fallen in. So the man shows him. Elisha cuts a piece of wood. We're not told the type of piece of wood. We're not told how he cut it. He cuts a piece of wood. He throws it into the river, and it makes the iron axe head float. We are not told how this worked, but what I do know is this, is iron axe heads don't float in water. Okay. That doesn't, scientifically that doesn't work. So what we're seeing here is a miracle resulting in the axe head being restored to the person who borrowed it. He was in a bad situation. He stepped out in faith, and now Elisha gets him off the hook. He doesn't have to go buy a new one. He doesn't have to pay to replace it. They get the old one back through this miraculous event. Now, in all three of these miracles that God did through Elisha, we see kind of a common theme. It's in a nation that one generation before just one generation before, was completely against God. They had sold themselves to Baal worship. But now we're seeing a few of them turn back to God. Now, I know the majority of Israel at this time is still into Baal worship. The majority of Israel is still into worshiping the golden calves that Jeroboam had set up. Most of the people have not turned back to the Lord, but we are seeing those who are. We're seeing a revival. We're seeing an awakening among the Israeli people as they turn back to the Lord and try to get things right. They're trying to do what's right in a society that's still mostly doing what's wrong. Now, the bad news is Israel never turns it around. Okay, you see ups and downs in Israel's history, but every king Israel has, once you get to the divided kingdom, every one of them is wicked. Okay, never do you see Israel wholeheartedly turn back to God. But you do see moments and pockets of revival where certain groups of people within Israel turn back to God. Now, down in Judah, there are moments where the entire nation turns back to God. You have certain kings like Hezekiah and Josiah who lead the nation back to God, and that's a wonderful thing. Israel doesn't have quite that level of blessing, but you do see pockets of revival. And so these people are trying to learn from Elisha. They're trying to get right with God, but that's often hard to do. You ever feel like you're trying to do the right thing and the world's just not making it easy? That's where they were. That's exactly where they were. The people around them were still lost in idolatry. See, revival isn't always clean and easy. I would love, for us to have a new great preacher like Billy Graham, somebody come on the scene and every American give their life to Jesus. That would be beautiful. I would love to see that happen. I would love to see a revival where every person in every corner of the world, from every nation, tribe, and tongue, gives themselves to Jesus, and we just have a big Christian community and we all sing Kumbaya. I would love to see that happen. But I know the devil's got his children out there too. I know there are people who resist the gospel. There are people who resist the truth. And revival is not always clean and easy. You always have people who respond to God's call, and you have people who reject it. There's different levels in society of that acceptance or rejection. And so you may go through times of transition as you move from being among a people who have rejected God to being among a people who have turned back to Him, but that doesn't mean it's going to be an easy transition. There may be a bumpy road to get there. See, we follow Jesus, and we got to keep our eyes on Him no matter how bumpy the road gets. Because it's not about the path we're walking, it's about the destination. He's going to see us safely home. Now, in the cases we just looked at here with Elisha, they were struggling for the basics of food and shelter. These people who had committed themselves, who had turned back to the Lord, they were struggling for food and shelter. Doing the right thing is not always the easy thing. What had they given up to follow the Lord? What had they given up to come and learn God's word from Elisha and to be a part of the revival that was taking place? And yet we see in each of these cases, we see God intervening to provide for His people as they move the right direction. When they were in danger of the poison stew, they had nothing else to eat, God healed it. That's a good biblical reason to pray for your food before you eat it, right? When they didn't have enough bread to eat, God multiplied the offering of bread that had been given. And when they were working to provide an expanded place for the sons of the prophets to live and to learn under Elisha, and it lost an expensive borrowed tool, God miraculously restored it to them. God provided. In each case, they were trying their best to walk with the Lord, and God reached into their everyday lives, their everyday activities, and He provided for them as they did so. Now, here's the point. We're praying for a national revival. least I hope you're praying for a national revival. You know, God tends to give us what we ask for. So if you ask not, you receive not. Well, you better be praying for a national revival. If you want a national revival, ask for it. It's what our nation needs. Our nation needs to turn back to Jesus. Okay, now I know you turn on the news, you'll see all kinds of problems, but Jesus will fix every last one of them. He's the solution. We need Jesus. Our people need Jesus. And so we are praying for revival, but that doesn't mean we won't face life's difficulties. That doesn't mean we won't face hard times. In fact, when we are going against the flow of society, the opposite direction of most people, when we're among the first to choose to follow Christ in a society that's moving the opposite direction, you will almost always certainly face hardships and difficulties. Revival's not easy, especially in the early days. How will you get through that process? By depending on the Lord. You keep your eyes on Jesus. You depend on the Lord for your provision. You will never see revival in this nation or any other if the people of God are not willing to step out in faith and follow Jesus. If we, the church of the living God, will not put our faith in Christ enough to trust Him, why would the world respond to our preaching, respond to our evangelism, to come to Him? We must trust Jesus to see us through the trials and tribulations that lie ahead, and go by faith, walking with Him, waiting for His provision. Now, what we see in these stories is believers facing difficulties where they're trying to do the right thing, they're trying to turn back to God, and God intervenes to provide for them while they're turning to Him. In fact, that's kind of a pattern you see throughout Elisha's ministry. When people turn to God, God answers. When they call out to the Lord for help, the Lord gives them help. If we are to experience this provision, if we are to experience revival, then we have to move forward trusting the Lord to provide for any difficulties that we inevitably will face. To follow Jesus requires faith. Faith. Not just a one-time faith of choosing to follow Him. Now, I think I know most of you well enough to say you've made that commitment. You said, yes, I believe in Jesus. I'm committing my life to Him. And I want to follow Jesus. I trust Him as my Lord and my Savior. I put my faith in Him. But what is required of us is an everyday faith. See, Jesus said, you must daily pick up your cross and follow me. I have to daily pick up that cross. I have to keep following Him. I have to choose every step of the way that I'm going to keep walking in His footsteps, trusting Him to see me through the problems of that day. And I'll tell you, every day has enough of its own. And when you face each and every one of them, you're making a choice. Am I going to trust God? Am I going to take another step trusting God? Am I going to keep going forward trusting God? What we find is that when we do this, when we step out in faith in an attempt to get our lives right with God, I'm not saying we're perfect, we mess up all the time, but I've got my faith in the right place. I've got my eyes on Jesus. He's going to lead me the right way. When we do that, then He meets us where we are. By His grace and His power, He provides what is needed to lead us safely home when we put our faith in Him. And so will we, as a church family, will we, as individual believers, choose to put our faith in Jesus? To say, yes, I'm walking with Him today. I'm going to trust Him. I know there might be difficulties, but I'm going to live for God. I know the world may not like it, but I'm going to turn to the Lord. I'm going to trust Him for my provision. I'm going to trust Him for what's coming in the future. Will we do that as believers. Because I believe if we will, when you see a group of God's people get together and say, yes, I'm putting my faith in Jesus, and I'm praying that he will do something great, that's when we see revival.